morning, everybody. I'm David Blanchflower. I'm Professor of Economics here, and I've had the pleasure of organizing this. A couple of things to say. We're delighted to be at the Spalding Auditorium. The President made sure it was open for us. I'm happy to say that we're happy to invite you and have you come to the grave stage of Spalding Auditorium. And many years we'll be here, I'm sure. So my job is to introduce a few people, and you'll see a lot of me during the day. Start off with our great presidents over there. Dr. Sian Leigh Balog is the 19th president of Dartmouth. Since her arrival in 23, President Balog has raised Dartmouth's profile as a global leader on critical issues, including freedom of expression, affordability, and student mental health and well-being. Under her leadership, Dartmouth has launched the Commitment to Care Strategic Plan, an evidence-based community-wide effort to strengthen wellness and mental health. That's been recognized nationally for its comprehensive and innovative approach. A leading cognitive scientist focused on performance under pressure, she's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the National Academy of Medicine. She's authored over 120 peer-reviewed papers and 2 acclaimed books, The Body Knows Its Mind, and this one called Choke. And for us, she hasn't been doing a lot of choking recently. I'm also, and her 2017 TED Talk has nearly 1 million views. And I just wanted to say something, because this event wouldn't have happened without her. So please join me in welcoming President Balog.
Thank you, Danny. I like it when anyone does an intro and carries my book. I feel like that's a good sign. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of all of us here at Dartmouth, welcome. Alongside our co-hosts at the United Nations, we are really deeply honored to bring the best minds in the world on issues around young people's mental health together for this historic symposium. A few years ago, at my Dartmouth inauguration address, I laid out 5 strategic areas of focus for the university. Mental health and well-being was the first area on the list, a precursor to the kind of academic excellence we strive for at Dartmouth. As a cognitive scientist focused on the psychology of performance, I see mental health as the foundation for everything we do here as an institution. Achieving academic excellence, as I mentioned, creating knowledge that changes the world, training leaders who are ready to solve the challenges the world faces in this moment. Every single part of this mission means having young people who are confident enough to take risks, comfortable enough to talk with others from different backgrounds and perspectives, and skilled enough to lead those who are different. Those are the kinds of leaders we pursue here at Dartmouth and help them reach their potential. They change not just our institutions, but the world. Our goal is to create them here in Hanover and send them off. 2 years ago, we launched Commitment to Care, a first-of-its-kind, evidence-based plan in higher education built around 73 specific actions informed by research of our own teacher scholars and many in this room today. Since that day, we've trained over 700 members of our community to recognize and respond to mental health challenges. We've met students where they are with innovative support, like You Will, our new online teletherapy services. Since its launch, students have used You Will for more than 14,000 therapy sessions. We've provided more tailored care with same-day crisis availability and new community partnerships to support all of our students. And we've designed an entire initiative, Dartmouth Dialogues, that works hand in hand with mental health to create space for students to have conversations with those they disagree with, who come from different backgrounds and viewpoints, giving them the skills to bridge personal and political divides so that they can lead folks who think like them and learn from those who think differently. Last year, our Dartmouth Dialogues programming reached over 1 million people. We're so excited about this storytelling and everything we're doing to push our community to help each other and learn through difference. Above all, we're thinking about the whole student, supporting every part of life at Dartmouth, from housing to nutrition to career design, so we can ease stress and anxiety and help our young people create better habits. I'm proud to say that we are seeing outcomes. Recently, we surveyed our student body looking at changes from 2021 to 2024, and we saw that risk for moderate to severe depression dropped from 33% to 24% in those 3 years. Perhaps most encouraging of all, the number of students who agree that Dartmouth prioritizes mental health has risen dramatically, from 44% in 2021 to 73% in 2024. We still have significant work ahead, but we also have hope and evidence that we can identify the interventions that truly make a difference. My promise to you is that we will continue to lead, innovate, and bring together the brightest minds in the world, just as we are doing this week. Our goal is clear: to nurture confident, supported, and healthy young people who are ready to face the challenges of this moment and make our world a better place. I know that together, this is exactly what we'll do. Thank you for being here, and now let me turn it back to Danny.
She's been great. Me again. So the program continues, and it's my pleasure to next welcome Dr. Stephen Leach, Interim Dean of the Geisel School of Medicine at Dartmouth, a nationally recognized leader in cancer research and academic medicine. Dr. Leach has served as director of the Dartmouth Cancer Center since 2017 until last month. He's a nationally recognized leader in cancer research and is a member of the National Academy of Medicine. His leadership has expanded clinical services, advanced research initiatives, and deepened community engagement. As Dean, he brings a deep commitment to excellence and collaboration across Dartmouth and Dartmouth Health. And Stephen's going to introduce the next set of speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Danny, and hello, everybody. How wonderful to be back in our beautiful Hopkins Center for the Arts, and how wonderful to celebrate this day as a shining example of Dartmouth as base camp to the world. Thank you all for joining us for this very special panel discussion. And today I have the great honor of welcoming you to Dartmouth, which, as many of us know, is the home of the C. Everett Koop Institute. Dr. Koop was an alumnus from the great Dartmouth class of 1937 and the 13th Surgeon General, and he also served as professor of surgery not only at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, but here at Geisel. And he inspired the mission of our Koop Institute in advancing health and well-being through research, education, policy efforts, and truly dedicated to protecting the public health, preventing disease, and promoting humanism in the practice of medicine. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize his wife, Cora, who's with us here today. Thank you for being here, Cora. Now, as we celebrated a couple weeks ago, when Dr. Koop was appointed Surgeon General in 1982, most Americans didn't know as much about the office as they do today, or its vital public health role, but through his advocacy, his determination, and the sheer tenacity of his personality, he raised the profile of this office and its mission considerably, and I think it's doubtless to say that American public health has been the better for it. So this morning, it's my pleasure to welcome back the Surgeons General to Dartmouth, Dr. Koop's successors, for this continuation of a historic discussion that was started here at Dartmouth 2 years ago. The combined experience on this stage spans decades of dedicated public service, from confronting epidemics to championing mental health, health equity, and the importance of science-based policy. The Surgeons General here today have served under 6 different administrations, face innumerable health crises, and brought unique perspectives to the role. But they all share a common commitment with each other and with Dr. Koop to protect and promote the health of every American. Thank you all for your remarkable service to our nation and for being here with us today. Now, please welcome to the stage Dr. Lisa McBride, Geisel's Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, who will introduce our esteemed panel. Lisa?
Good morning and welcome. I'd like to thank all of you for taking part and joining us for our first session of Day 2 of the Dartmouth United Nations World Mental Health Conference. I would like to also extend a personal special thanks to a standing room only student roundtable discussion last night. The students united their voices and allowed an honest conversation about college student mental health and well-being. My gratitude to those who drove from across the New England area to participate with the nation's top docs in having a serious conversation about student well-being. So today's session, we'll examine the global health crisis, looking at it from a public health perspective, from the perspective of Surgeon Generals in the last 40 years. The nation's doctors provide Americans with the best scientific information on mental health through major reports and advisories. Can you imagine in the last 100 years, there's only been 21 United States Surgeon Generals wearing that uniform that I like to have. We have 6 of the living United States Surgeon Generals here right today. And so I would like you to hold your applause as I sort of introduce them. They have a long bio, so they promised me that I should be very short and brief, but please read their bios later. We first have Dr. Antonia Novello. She's a pediatric nephrologist who was appointed by George H.W. Bush as the 14th Surgeon General. She was the first woman and the first Hispanic person to hold that position. Next will be Dr. Joycelyn Elders, pediatrician, endocrinologist, was appointed as the 15th Surgeon General by President Bill Clinton. She was the first African American to hold this position. Next is Dr. David Satcher, who is a physician, scientist, and was appointed the 16th Surgeon General of the United States by Bill Clinton. He was also appointed as the Assistant Secretary of Health, making him the second person ever to hold both positions at the same time. Wow. He also served, in addition to that, if that wasn't enough, he also was the director of the Center for Disease Control during that time. Next is Dr. Richard Carmona, who is a surgeon with a subspecialty in trauma, burns, and critical care. He was appointed the 17th Surgeon General by President George W. Bush, and is also a combat decorated Vietnam veteran with the Special Forces. Next is Dr. Jerome Adams, who is an anesthesiologist and was appointed the 20th Surgeon General by President Donald Trump. Before that time, he was the Indiana State Health Commissioner. And last but not least, Dr. Vivek Murthy is a physician, a best-selling author, and the 19th and the 21st Surgeon General of the United States, being appointed by President Barack Obama and then by President Joe Biden. He also wrote 2 major advisories on mental health, one on protecting youth mental health in 2021, and another on mental health and well-being of parents and caregivers just this year, 2025. So our subject matter experts needed someone that could moderate the conversation. They didn't pick me. And so because of the government shutdown, we wanted to pivot and bring one of the most brilliant minds in this field. He is a subject matter expert. He will be our moderator. His whole career has highlighted the urgency of mental health crisis among youth. He emphasizes the need for a collaborative, multi-stakeholder approach to his work. He is also the chief of the Division of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, the co-director of the Center for Addiction Medicine at Mass General, and a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. But most importantly, I got him to come from Chicago last night as he was inducted as the president-elect of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry in Chicago. So Tim Wilens, thank you so much for pitching in for me. I appreciate it. So with that being said, let's welcome our platform. And it's only fitting, President Bylock, since you got me into all of this when you arrived, thank you for your leadership, is that I know you love selfies and you need a picture, so I would love for you to join the stage, the platform, to get a picture. And everybody get out their phones, take a picture. This is history. Thank you. And then, Dr. Wilens, we will begin our discussion. Thank you, Dan.
President, come over here. Close to the women. Make sure you tag us on Twitter.
Well, I want to welcome everybody, and it's really a faux pas to start with something you're envious about, but I have to say, as the chief at Mass General Hospital, that this isn't at Mass General and it's happening at Dartmouth. I'm really envious. I can't tell you how excited I am that we're here talking about today pediatric mental health. Pediatric mental health. It isn't that pediatric mental health gets such airtime, and to be here, to be able to talk about it, and then to listen to expert opinion, to hear people who are in the know, who have had to deal with this, is really remarkable. I've had the opportunity to get to meet the Surgeon Generals and to review sort of their portfolios. Let me tell you, that takes a long time. It's a remarkable thing. Look at them. It's also interesting how not one person gets there through any route. They are the most circuitous routes to get to be the Surgeon General. But what I'm struck with is, first of all, every one of them have done something that touches pediatric mental health. Number two, they have moved the dial. They have moved the dial. There are things done by each one of you, and I really mean it, thank you, that makes my life as a practicing child psychiatrist, but also as a chief and working on systems and worrying about all the children in the United States and across the world much easier because of actions they've had. And something that I'm walking away from this with, and something that you're all challenged with, is what do we do? And let's do something. Let's do something. So there's actionable items that we're going to be able to come up with today. And why? Because I'm hearing things packaged from them that I've never heard put that way. I'm already trying to invite them to the American Academy meetings because we need that to help direct us. So we're going to be in a question-answer period asking them a question. They didn't know the question. I was very happy that none of them threatened me if I didn't tell them the question in advance. They're very civil. But they'll get a question, 10 minutes or so to respond to the question, and then a follow-up question that's embedded in that. Did you all hear that? 10 minutes. They have a lot of opinions, no surprise. But I do believe we're going to be starting with a video. Dr. Satcher, as many people may or may not know, was one of the first to really put a white paper out and really put mental health on the map from a Surgeon General's perspective in a way that is enduring, everlasting, and we still use the findings from what Dr. Satcher said. Things that are facts now, at the time weren't facts. Things that we live by weren't. So we're going to have the capacity to hear a little bit more about that.
I released the first ever Surgeon General's report on mental health in 1999. My intention was that the report would usher in a healthy era of mind and body for the nation. The report recognizes the relationship between mental health and physical health and well-being, and the need to create a system of care that not only treats illness, but also promotes health. A balanced community health system balances health promotion, disease prevention, early detection, and universal access. This system concept would require a partnership between primary care and mental health. A balanced partnership provides an opportunity for the coordination and integration of patient care. Primary care providers must remember that they are not alone. The primary care provider is the quarterback of the healthcare team that collaboratively makes the system work. In the Surgeon General's report, Mental Health, we reported that stigma prevented individuals from acknowledging their mental health problems and thus prevented early diagnosis and treatment. Also, parents often neglect to seek care for their children due to embarrassment and fear that such a diagnosis might interfere with the child's future. We must acknowledge and find ways to overcome the barriers of stigma. We need to build public awareness regarding mental health and effective treatment. We must address the serious shortage of mental health providers. But we also must address the lack of training available for many community helpers who could potentially impact a person's health. We need to ensure the delivery of state-of-the-art treatment, which means moving frontline knowledge to frontline care, so that primary care providers have access to knowledge, technology, and teams of experts to support their work with their patients. We need to tailor treatment to age, to gender, to race, and to culture. We need to facilitate entry into treatment. We need to remove the financial barriers that create complexity and restrictions within our healthcare system. In order to eliminate disparities in health, we need leaders. Leaders who care enough, leaders who know enough, leaders who will do enough, and who are persistent enough until the job is done.
The numbers vary, but anywhere from 50 to 70 million Americans, there are 50 to 70 million children in the United States and over 1.5 billion across the world. We know that about 15% of kids in the US and across the world have some form of major psychiatric disorder we call psychopathology, necessitating treatment. So many of you are like, oh, okay, so what? Well, let's start with adult psychopathology. Half of adult psychiatric disorders onset by the age of 18. Did you know that? 50%. 75% by the age of 24. So really what we're talking about is many things start during childhood. There's an increase recently in childhood disorders. There's increases in depression, suicidality. There's more stress. We're more and more worried about it. There's this kind of harmonics about an endemic, pandemic of mental health, et cetera. So why is that occurring? And that's really what's going to be the etiology of the question, and what do we do with it? So we've heard from Dr. Satcher, and that was unbelievably wonderful. Dr. Carmona, what is it that's driving children's mental health? What are the 2 or 3 things that you see are sort of driving forces for that? And as a policy, is there one thing that you know, I know there's multiple, but one thing would you do to help sort of abrogate that rise or the stress on children's mental health?
Well, I thank you for the question, and I think first and foremost that we have to recognize that the nation's mental health, which begins with our children, is a national security issue because it robs us of resources. These are the leaders of the future that we are educating and training. As you know, this is a multifactorial etiology, meaning there's lots of causes, okay? We've heard some already that David has so eloquently pointed out. And now I want to give a shout out to my colleague Vivek Murthy at the end, because when he left being Surgeon General, he did a call to action, if you will, in a letter that he gave to the public and said, here's my parting words to you. And he spoke about building community. And a lot of this is about building community, that this inclusiveness, that we're all humans. Doesn't make a difference of your party or your color or anything else. And we have to develop a society that respects each and every one of us, and that starts in childhood as we're raising our children. So I think first and foremost, we've heard about destigmatization, but the fact that every parent has an opportunity and an obligation to raise global leaders, if you will, that have a big vision and create environments where are, as much as possible, being stress-free. I mean, you know better than anybody, growing up is stressful as a child. But yet there's so many things that are tied into this. The work that David did many years ago on the social determinants of health are directly related to the outcome of our children. If they can't find food, if they don't have a safe environment, if there is uncertainty about their lives in general. So I think it would be a disservice to say, here's a thing, but I think what's most important is recognizing that this is a multifactorial issue of where there's incremental variables that each and every one has to be addressed. And if we do that successfully, we raise the next generation of young men and women who are free of the burden of mental health problems. The preventable disease and economic burden associated with that goes down. We have a healthier society. It addresses national security issues as well, because we cannot be secure if we don't have significant mental health within our communities. So I think my answer is, I know, broader than maybe what you liked, and I wish I had a single answer, but I think the challenge for all of us is the complexity of this problem, but having leaders like you and others in child psychiatry to guide us, and having our decisions not come from politicians, but the science that drives this. Because last thing I'll say to you, thank you. I think this is an important point as well. When we embarked on this journey of Surgeon Generals coming together, and it was Chick Coop that had the first conversation with me, and I said, you know, Chick, there's so much out there that we can do, but when we leave the office, we kind of, the old warriors just disappear. We go into life. What if we stay together after office and we form this collective and we work together, and not to be talking heads, but when necessary, we come and address the public when there is a faltering of leadership and things are being misdirected and we're being plagued with misinformation and disinformation. Who better than a group of Surgeon Generals to stand up here and tell you truth, and truth to power? And so, the issue for our children is extraordinarily important, and that's why we're here today. But really, the bigger picture that I always talk about with many of the students I've had the pleasure to meet today is all of these individual issues that we're speaking about are extraordinarily important. Maybe nothing more important than raising our children to be good citizens and healthy and free of mental health problems. But we can't do that unless we preserve our democracy. That's the real issue before us today as a nation.
No offense, but the American Academy of Child Psychiatry doesn't really know how to preserve our democracy as a so much. We'll work on that, but thank you so much. Dr. Elders, same question to you. You know, you've been at the forefront of helping, especially with certain vulnerable populations, but what do you see as driving our current stressors in mental health in kids, and what one or two things could we do to obviate or change it?
I think you've heard some of the things that we can do, but I think we need to probably even realize, and the thing that upset me is when I realized that the mental health of the most valuable resource we'll ever have, our children, is at stake. And that it's, rather than getting better, it's been getting worse. And that's very distressing to me. And, you know, I was very concerned about, I've always been very concerned about adolescents, children, young people's issues. Those were, whatever they were, whatever, I felt that we need to fight about it. Well, then I think we need to think about what it is that we, not only globally one thing, because there is no one thing. I think we all have a responsibility, and we all can do something. And to me, we can start out with, we can say, well, what can parents do? And there are a list of things which parents can do that will really make a difference with what's going on with our children. What can our policymakers do? What can our teachers, schools, what can schools do? What can communities do? And of course, we always have to get back, well, what can I do? What can we as individuals do? And I think there have been some nice things that've been talked about, it's been said that we can do. That it's like schools, they were saying, have a school opening late time. Our kids are not getting enough sleep at night. First of all, because they're up all night watching TV, watching on their iPhone. So, and that's okay. I'm not knocking that, but I'm just saying, but they end up not getting enough sleep. And so they're saying, well, in many schools, there's been a study of schools who have a later start time, that the kids do better in school, they make better grades, there's less rowdiness and, trauma going on. So they're really much more, and they're much more attentive. And they're less fighting in the hall with school. So that's just with starting school, rather than at 7 o'clock or 8, starting at 8:30. So there's been a big push, but so schools could do that. And then they say what parents can do, where they can say, well, we're going to have a special room where we're going to put up all the cell phones in the kitchen, or at 8:30 at night. We're going to hook them up so they can be all charged up and ready in the morning. But we're going to get this done. But that keeps the kids from being on the phone all night. And so, but these are things that parents could do today. And well, we as parents, are probably most guilty, but we could really communicate with our children. Now we do a lot of talking at them, but sometimes we don't communicate with them. We don't really talk to the children. So I think that's, we're talking about things that we could do. And then of course we can talk about things that, often we don't know when our children are getting in trouble, but we can make sure that weapons, the third most common cause of adolescents dying is really gun violence. So we could make sure we lock up, when we recognize that they're in trouble, lock up the guns and the knives and the things to recognize that they really do have a problem. And often parents know this, but we just don't always do it, And of course, we all have to be concerned about our children getting in trouble with drugs. And of course, I have had that experience with alcohol and drugs. So these are things. And then we as a community, we need to be concerned about the bullying and the things, many of the things that are going on, sexuality issues, racial issues, poverty issues. And the community needs to be, and the government needs to be concerned about these kinds of things. And the community has to be involved. Sometimes all a student may need, all a young person might need is John, how are you doing today? Are you feeling okay? You're not alone. So I'm just saying there are lots of we don't have to go out and feel we got to change the whole world in individual, but there are lots of individual little things that we could do, I think, that would make an awful lot of difference for the adolescent, for the health of our adolescents that we aren't doing. And I think that, teachers and counselors, and I'll shut up after I tell you this one thing, but one of the things we started in the largest high school in Arkansas, Central High School. Everybody's heard of Central High School if you've heard of racial issues and integration and all, that's kind of where some of the big things start. But the Annie Casey Foundation provided the funds for a school-based clinic. And as I told the group yesterday, it was called everything from a sex clinic, condom clinic, every kind of clinic in the world. But the principal at that school told me the most students use that clinic for consultation and for mental health problems and to go in for issues. Because of that, Arkansas even demanded, there's a law, we don't use it, but it had to have, we had to put in school-based education, but it was more, they had to define how many, you all probably may already have all of this, more counselors at schools because kids needed to talk to somebody. And the other thing is they made sure every student in that school and most had an adult that they could go talk to. When things got tough and they couldn't stand it another minute, that they could go find, that there was an adult that they could go to. I'm gonna shut up. I could tell a lot more about that, but let me just shut up.
So there's certainly a number of other topic items that we will want to touch base on. We have three surgeons who may want to opine on that. I did want to just follow up on something you said, which I love, is the solution is really in front of us. Right. And it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. We just need to capitalize on that. And just a couple of things. For example, I love your comment about starting schools later. We're not talking about Dartmouth. I recommend Dartmouth starts at like 4 in the morning. But outside of that, in general, we use science. They call it circadian rhythm. They talk when you go to sleep, when you wake up, it's shifted in kids, right? And because of that, we're asking kids to wake up earlier than their natural endogenous diurnal rhythms when they're supposed to be waking up. And if you don't believe me, if you have a teenager at home, just watch them and wake them up early, right? There's a reason for that. So what you're talking about is harnessing science to help us better understand and make a change that, by the way, helps. And by the way, that also solves part two. You said sleep. You sleep better, right? Sleep the next day, arousal, attention is two of the things, along with mood. So arousal, attention, and mood, we improve. And you also commented on moving around, physicality. If you add those to your daily regimen, that improves an awful lot of children's mental health, and it didn't cost us anything. So I love those kinds of solutions. Thank you so much. Dr. Novello, the same question to you. You come with unique blood as a pediatrician, as does Dr. Elders, but both from a pediatric position and as a surgeon general. What do you see that's driving things, and what might we do?
It's very hard to follow these two, but I'm going to try. Well, I have to tell you, when there is 1.5 million people in the world that suffer depression, when you have 31% of United States children, 1 out of 3 having some kind of mental issue in the last 30 days, you have a problem. 40% have hopelessness, but what worries me the most, 1 out of 5 have thought about suicide. 16% have made a plan, and 9% have accomplished it. When you have those statistics, we have a problem, and we have to take care of it in this country of ours. And at this moment, I think some of the basic problems that I see are out there is basically social media. I believe that social media is one of the biggest causes of children having problems, always identifying their body. I have the feeling that when forever I am barraged with sensitivity about my body, and I have cyberbullying, and I have loneliness, and I have changes in myself that I really cannot address, I have problems with social media. But what worries me the most is that in this moment and time, we have been parents, as I have read, 95% of them, children, 95% have social media, at least one of them. 72% have changed from social media at the level of 95 to 72% have what they call companions of artificial intelligence. Where did we lose our children that they believe more on the help of a person that is not real rather than a parent that knows exactly what they need? I also have to tell you, if we're going to take care of social media, we have to do what 12 countries have done. They have decided legislation barring or diminishing their influence, and Australia in particular, below the age of 16, you cannot have one platform that has to do with social media, and they are following it. And more than anything, 33 countries have decided that 71% of them want social media banned out of their countries. So if that's the case, the only one that I don't see anywhere in that particular place is the United States of America. And our children are going to need also some platform. We really diminish the influence. Where did we lose our children? Social media has done a lot of effect. The other thing that worries me tremendously is this issue of academic pressures. In where, who am I? Where do I want to go? Who controls my study? Am I having too many tests? I have too many stresses. So in that sense, the stresses of academic are also dealing a lot with the children's problems. Family issues are also dealing a lot with this particular thing. We have adverse childhood activities and things that happen that no one's asked me about it when I'm seen as a patient. And in that sense, I have divorce. I have a parent that died. I have violence. I have all the things that have to do with depression. And in that sense, I have, apart from violence, I have a father or a mother that left me, and a divorce has become crucial. 3 divorces per 1,000 people. So those things are extremely important because sometimes just addressing one question can save a life. I am extremely worried about the instability of the economic part of the world, and in particular, the conflicts. We have 31 conflicts in the world today, and 2 wars, and the children worry. Before there was a pandemic, and there was a climate, and they just don't know if they're going to be alive in the next 5 years. That worries me. And the one that worries me even more is that identity crisis that is in the United States, that the adolescents cannot deal with it. My ethnicity, my orientation, or exactly where did I come from. That has to change in this United States as well. Those 5 things are driving the kids to go really needing a lot of help. So what do you think I want to do? The most important thing, if I have the power in my hand, I will take away all the guilt and all the shame that comes with mental health, with a world campaign that erases it, with a media that respects mental health, with stereotyping it. Remember, depression is one thing, and mental illness is one thing. It is not, it is science, it is health. It is not something that is invented out of moral issues. So at this moment, I want to campaign against the shame, against the guilt that comes with mental health. But more than anything, I want mental health to be ascribed to real health. I should not see a division between the health that is mental and the health that is health. I want to be able to train more people to see me, because there are only 50,000 psychiatrists in the world. But I also want to make sure that if I have more people taking care of me, that their loans are forgiven, because they are doing a great asset to the last thing, which is mental need in this country of ours. Forgive that loan and let everybody study to be able to be an assistant in healthcare. I want to be able to have them safe spaces. And I want them to be able to have children involved in the campaign that has to do with all these things regarding stigma in mental health. But I also want to make sure that there's education. This can only disappear with education, from the families to the community. One person that believes in me, one community that takes care of me, and somebody that understands my pain is going to help all these children. But remember, at this moment, what we need more than anything is ask the right question, and you might save a life. So I want you to make sure that we have 24/7 lines. that we have crisis centers where they can go, that they have safe spaces where they can go, and that parents start taking their arms back again into their children communication face to face. How can I let a robot tell my child that they love him more than me? Take back the spaces, diminishes the interaction. Make sure that you don't put it at the time they go to bed and at the time they're eating with that phone, and maybe we start a new war. But more than anything, I want to leave you with something that I think it will be what we need to remember, and that's a Nigerian proverb that says, not to know is bad. Not to want to know is worse. Not to hope is unthinkable. And not to care is unforgivable. Don't let anyone think that Dartmouth and everybody in this audience has ever forgotten about their fellow man and their children with mental problems. Thank you very much.
Oh, we're actually not rapping right now. I know it felt that way. We were all watching that. It's really absolutely remarkable, and it's hard to punctuate any one thing. We heard it, but I have to say that destigmatization is a huge issue that actually everybody could work on. We have a saying in our department when it comes to just general mental health, and it certainly is with pediatric mental health, no family goes untouched. I want you to think about that. No family goes untouched. Either you're directly or indirectly affected by some type of a behavioral health issue. Well, if that's the case, then how can it be stigmatized? Why is it stigmatized when every family is affected by it? So get that message out. Remind people of that. Remind your friends and colleagues who may be struggling with that, who then, as to hear, now twice you've heard about the importance of community of both mental health providers, but also community of people with mental health. I want to shift. Dr. Adams, you've been really at the forefront of a lot of innovation. You know, talk about solvable. You are a HEAL, people have heard of the HEAL initiative. You were recipients. Dartmouth was one of the recipients of the HEAL grants. HEAL really changed things. We have drug problems, we have overdose problems are on the rise. HEAL kicked a super innovative operation and reduced substance use, it's down. And it reduced opioid overdoses. They're down. We're not out of the thing, but they're down. And there's a reason for that. That's not just coincidental. So you come from some of that innovation blood. Same question to you now. Child mental health, what do you see as driving, and what would you do in contemporary space, innovatively, to move the dial?
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I feel a little bit set up following these folks and, asking myself, what can I contribute that's additive and not duplicative? One of the things I would say, and this is something that I often think on as the Director of Health Equity at Purdue University, I talk about the medical model that we're trapped in the United States, where we spend a disproportionate amount of our resources on diagnosis and treatment and not on prevention and wellness. And when it comes to mental health, whenever we have a conversation, we always hear that we need more treatment centers, we need more providers, we need more diagnosis, and that's true. But I think oftentimes that conversation comes at the expense of thinking about mental health, not as mental illness, but as mental wellness. And what can we do to create communities that are more supportive of our young people so that they don't have problems in the first place, so that they don't feel the need to self-medicate. And so I think shifting that paradigm a little bit is something important for us to consider moving forward. How can we focus more on mental health and wellness and not just on mental illness and diagnosis and treatment? Number two, I have to tell you that I took a deep dive on a couple of issues that I do think are particularly plaguing young people when I was Surgeon General. One of them is marijuana use. And it is important for you all to remember that marijuana 20, 30 years ago was 4.5% THC. And that's like a light beer. Marijuana today, most strains are 20 to 30% THC, like having a strong mixed drink or a big glass of wine. And that's before you vape it, and then it becomes 80% THC. That's like drinking grain alcohol. So this is a fundamentally different product, and what does that mean? That means that whereas we weren't thinking of marijuana 20, 30 years ago as being addictive, it's absolutely creating dependence nowadays in our young people. Whereas we didn't think there were negative issues from marijuana use, we're absolutely seeing increase in psychoses in young people now because of marijuana use. And I have 3 children, well, 2 adult children now. One's 21, one's 19. They're both in college, and my daughter is 15. I went to visit my son at school for Dad's Day. We walked through his frat house. The entire frat house smelled like pot. I mean, it did. I'm just being very honest with you. I mean, the usage is pervasive. We have normalized it, and that bothers me. Number 2, as a father of 2 young boys, I think an issue that we are just starting to appreciate, and it's been all over the news in the last week, gambling. Online gambling. Do you know that people who are gambling are at the highest risk of attempting to take their lives by suicide? And now we've created these easy access online platforms. Every single one of my sons and their friends have all these betting apps on their phones. They're starting in high school, sometimes in middle school. So I think that is something that is incredibly important for us to think about as we're thinking about the next era. And then another point that I think most people in this audience will appreciate, but I would be remiss if someone up here didn't mention it. For every mental health issue that we talk about, the LGBTQ plus community disproportionately is impacted. Higher rates of suicide, higher rates of substance misuse. We have to create inclusive environments and safe spaces to have conversations about sexual identity and to make sure people don't feel ostracized no matter how they identify. So those are issues that I think that haven't been talked about yet that I want to highlight to the group. And I want to make sure we save time, but you asked what can we do. A couple of quick things that I think we can do that give me hope. One of them is technology. When you look at telehealth, we have been able to massively increase access to services through telehealth. And I was at an event just last week on mental health and technology, hearing from companies that are using telehealth and new platforms, chatbots, and other new avenues of technology to be able to massively increase our ability to provide mental health services to young people. It's interesting when we talk about social media. Dr. Murthy is the expert on this, but it's a tool. It's an absolute harm. I see it in my own children. But that said, we know, for instance, for the LGBTQ community, we live in the Midwest. Sometimes it's a lifeline to people who think and talk like them. So how do we leverage social media and technology in a positive way? Workforce. We know that we can massively lower the workload on individuals through ambient AI and scribes and through other technologies that actually increase mental health services. We can increase contact between patients. So this was interesting at the event I was at last week. People who use ambient AI scribes actually feel like it's increasing interaction, technology is increasing interaction between them and the patients, because instead of looking away from the patient and typing on the computer, you now have the ability to face the patient the entire time, and someone else is writing that note. So I'm excited about technology, and to the young people in here, I would say really help us old fogies understand how to leverage technology, how to leverage social media in a positive way to promote mental health. And I'll close with this. I'm very proud of my kids. My daughter, Amelia, is here. Millie, please stand up. And her friend Ellis is here. Can you both stand up and stay standing? Stay standing because I'm going to make a point here. I'm going to make a point here. You ask, what can we do? Us old folks can help empower the young people. Can help empower the young people and get out of their way, because we aren't going to be able to solve these problems. We can help them solve the problems. And I'm so glad we've got so many young people here in the audience. I'm so glad we're having this conversation on Dartmouth's campus. But in the future, we need to make sure this room is 70, 75, 80% young people, because they're the ones who know how to solve these issues and are going to. Final point, because I think this is important to your point about stigma. I actually work with the NBA, I work with the Pro Football Hall of Fame. When you talk about stigma, I've been really, really pleased to see Simone Biles, to see Kevin Love, to see all the folks who were coming forward and talking about mental health. And this ties into young people because my daughter, my boys, are more likely to do something if LeBron James or Tom Brady tells them to do it than if the Surgeon General of the United States, who happens to be their dad, tells them to do it. And so I think we need to think about how we pull in some of those folks. iHeartMedia, I've worked with them. How can we leverage celebrities like Taylor Swift and other folks who young people are more likely to listen to and who can normalize positive behaviors or who can normalize negative behaviors? I think those are some things that we should be thinking about as we explore our strategies to actually address mental health and wellness in society, and as we think about who we can empower in order to actually solve these issues. I'm in trouble with my daughter after this, so.
I did want to just highlight a couple of things. Number one, we heard about cannabis, so that's the first time sort of cannabis rose to the top here, and I think exactly what you're hearing, the potency of cannabis moved from 4 to 8, and then it sat around 12%, and then it jumped up to 16, it's over 20%, and then when it's more purified form, you start to approach 80%. Well, so what? Well, so what is, when you start going north of 20, 25%, you start to see a lot of probably neurotoxic effects, certainly in the young brain, and they've shown that. But you also see behavioral health effects. You see higher rates of depression, anxiety. They're seeing new onset ADHD-like symptoms. But the biggest one is psychosis. New onset psychotic disorders, schizophrenic-like illness that wouldn't have existed before. It used to be cannabis was an irritant, that you would see it, but in people with what they call premonitory symptoms. You sort of had some of the symptoms of schizophrenia, and if you smoked, bing, you would see it pop. But what they're seeing now is they use the word de novo, new, out of nowhere, new onsets of psychotic illness that doesn't go away after smoking high-potency marijuana. We are literally creating a new generation of very, very sick people that are going to have a very tenuous prognosis over time. So what is the government doing about that? One of the things they're doing is trying to really understand that. And I should know this, so I apologize, but raise your hands if you were involved with the ABCD study, the big government study. So I always thought, yes. So the ABCD you should know about is the Adolescent Brain and Cognitive Development Study that is studying 10,000 9 to 10-year-olds for 10 years. And they're doing yearly micro analysis of their behaviors, et cetera, but they're also looking at neuroimaging, neuropsych testing, et cetera. I was involved in helping to write the first part, the mental health component of that. And what they are looking at is, does stuff predispose you to develop cannabis use disorder, or does cannabis use disorder change things after? That's the main power of that study. Now, it's doing a lot of other things. There's I don't know how many thousands of papers already out there, about halfway through where they're going, but they're really trying to tease out what is the chicken and what is the egg in terms of cannabis and bad outcomes over time. So far, not good, especially with high potency. So I really appreciate you.
And anyone who wants more information, you can go to surgeongeneral.gov, and it actually has all of our advisories and publications listed on the website. And in 2018, I put out an advisory warning of the dangers of youth marijuana use. I was accused of fear-mongering by a lot of the public at the time in places like New Hampshire, in places like Massachusetts, who were at the forefront of legalizing and allowing. Many folks did not appreciate that, but we're now in a stage, several years later, where people are seeing the dangers, the harms that we were warning about. So if you want to do a little bit of a deeper dive based on the information we had back then, or the other reason we put together these publications is so that you all can go out in your communities and say, the Surgeon General said, Dr. Murthy said we need to be more concerned about about social media. Dr. Adams said we need to be more concerned about marijuana. So please check that out and see all the things that we've put together, because we do it for you all to help you better advocate in your communities.
Yeah, we made one too, but not many people distributed, Tim Wilens said. So I would do that strategy if I were you. I do want to leave time, and Dr. Murthy joined us and is contemporaneous with all of the activities that are ongoing and has written books about this, which I think are really helpful. So, I'm really interested both from sort of your scholarly as well as your Surgeon General hat, and as you've investigated this further, what's driving things, and what things do you think we can do to help promote or improve child mental health and well-being?
Well, thank you for that question. And my thanks to President Barlock of Dartmouth for hosting us here today, bringing us together, and especially to our dear friend Tony Novello, who has often been the instigator of our Dartmouth gatherings. And thank you, Tony, for bringing us together again. I got to just tell you before I get into the answer, I was sitting here at the beginning and just looking at all of us sitting in this circle, and it felt surreal in a moment, because I was taken back to when I was a child growing up in Miami, Florida. And I was a really shy kid, very introverted. It was like lonely a lot, didn't have a lot of confidence, didn't know what my future would hold. But to be able to sit here on this stage with people who I so deeply respect, who I consider icons in health, and who I now have the great privilege of calling friends, this is just an extraordinary honor for me. And as somebody who is the grandson of a poor farmer from India, whose dad was never supposed to leave the village in India that he was brought up in, who was raised in really dire poverty, to have the chance to come to the United States, to be raised in the public school system here and find teachers who looked out for me, and ultimately to be given the chance to become a doctor and to serve as Surgeon General. This is an extraordinary kind of story that many of us have had, but can only occur in very few countries. And it's one of the reasons that I will always be grateful for the blessing and the power of the United States of America. I will also say that one of the things that this kind of experience teaches me, and I suspect all of us in our own way have walked very unlikely paths to this office, have undergone our own hardships, our own challenges, have been raised in difficult environments. We've gone through our own things. But when you get through those experiences and you have the privilege of serving in a position like ours, for me, one of the things it does is it underscores the obligation for us to knock down the barriers that prevent other people from being able to serve, from being able to be in leadership positions, whether it's in government or in the private sector. And that's one of the reasons that we continue to work closely with groups that have traditionally been marginalized, with young people, with folks of different communities, so that everybody can see that it's our collective responsibility to make sure that opportunity is open to everyone. One of the reasons my parents came to the United States was not because they thought the United States was perfect, but they wanted their kids to grow up in a country that aspired to create opportunities for everyone, that aspired to look at everyone as having equal value. And I know we haven't always lived up to that as a country, but we want to, and it's up to all of us to ensure that we continue to do so. The issue of mental health is one that's near and dear to me for many reasons. One, because as a doctor, I saw a lot of mental health struggles with my patients. And it's also because as a young kid, I struggled a lot with my mental health, even though I never told anyone about that. To this day, I never really talked to my parents about it. But the reason I didn't talk about it was because I was ashamed. It's the same reason so many people don't, right? I thought that struggling with your mental health means something is wrong with you, that you are broken in some way. And worst of all, I think that makes us feel like we're perhaps not likable or not lovable. And that's a terrible thing to feel. And right now, there are many people, adults and young people across our country, who are feeling that way. And we can change that. We can shift that simply by opening up conversations about mental health, by talking to people about how they are, by checking on our friends who we know are struggling with their mental health. When we think about what's driving this broader crisis, there are things that have been challenges for a long time. We know that trauma and violence have been challenges in society for a long time. We know that access to care, to mental health care, has been inadequate for many years. And we've touched on some of these items. I want to touch on maybe a few others just to round out our conversation. One is I think about a conversation I had with a young person at a roundtable for youth that I was doing, where she reached into her pocket, she pulled out her phone, and she said, every few minutes, my phone is buzzing with some headline that tells me everything that is wrong about the world. It tells me about a new conflict, about somebody who's corrupt, about somebody who did something terrible. She's like, how am I supposed to feel positive about the future? How am I supposed to wake up each day and feel excited about what's to come? We live in an information environment that is fundamentally different from anything we grew up in, those of us on stage. And I think if I grew up in the current media environment that I'm in, I think I would struggle a lot. Because when I was growing up, if I wanted to shut off the flow of negative news, I just walked up to the TV and turned it off, right? And literally turned it off. There was a knob on the television. But I didn't bring that TV to bed with me, to the gym with me, to school with me. It didn't buzz with new headlines that were designed to stoke anxiety and fear, because the engagement models are primarily driven by that. The revenue models are based on attention and how much of that you can grab from each person. And we know from human psychology, anxiety and fear are the best ways to grab people's attention. So that has now been weaponized to the benefit, of companies that are seeking to drive the revenue, but to the harm of those of us who care about our mental health and well-being. The second issue, though, that is also driving in more recent years the mental health crisis, especially among youth, has been a broader epidemic of loneliness and isolation that we're seeing. Like this is one of those issues that I never really thought about as a public health issue when I was going through medical school, because the truth is I never learned about it in medical school. But from the moment I set foot in the hospital as a third-year medical student, I began to see so many of my patients who were in fact struggling with loneliness or isolation. They may have come in for a blood clot or a heart attack or complications of their chemotherapy or a skin infection. But there in the background was often lurking the sense of loneliness and isolation. And what we've come to see now over time, and what I heard from so many people as I traveled across the country during my time in office, was that loneliness is not only extraordinarily common, with about 1 in 3 adults and about 1 in 2 young people struggling with loneliness, but it's also consequential. It increases our risk of anxiety, depression, and suicide. And by the way, the numbers aren't small here. So traditionally, like in medicine and public health, if something is going to cause like a 5% increase in risk for a really consequential health condition, we pay attention, like that matters. But when it comes to social disconnection, we're talking, and the impact on mental health, we're talking about a doubling in the risk of depression, so not small. But we're also talking about a significant increase in the risk of physical health conditions, so 29% increase in the risk of heart disease, 31% increase in the risk of stroke, 50% increase in the risk of dementia among older people, and an overall mortality impact that's actually comparable to smoking, as well as to obesity. So this issue of loneliness and isolation is really profoundly important, but I do think it has become a driver, one of several drivers to the mental health crisis that we're seeing today. And lastly, I want to underscore the point around technology. Like Dr. Adams, I very much believe that technology is a tool. It's how we design it, how we use it, that determines whether it helps us or hurts us. And I spent 7 years of my life prior to being in government building a technology company to help advance research and clinical trials. So I'm a believer in technology. But I'm also clear-eyed about the fact that the way we have designed social media has not been beneficial to our kids, and I would argue to most of us. And that was one of the reasons why in 2023 I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on social media and youth mental health. And I did so against a lot of opposition, frankly, to doing that report. I think many of us, in our own ways, during our time in office, had to speak out about issues or write about issues that weren't necessarily easy or politically convenient. But we did them because we believed it was important for the public health of the nation. It's one of the reasons I so deeply admire the people who are on this stage. But in the case of social media, the reason that this, again, was not something I had planned to do a report on. But in my travels around the country, the most common question I was getting from parents was, is social media safe for my kids? Is social media safe for my kids? And it's a very reasonable question for a parent to ask, right? We ask about whether certain foods are safe for our kids, whether car seats are safe for our kids, whether cars themselves are okay for our kids. We ask about anything that our child consumes or touches. We want to know if that's been studied and if it's safe for our kids. Yet, as Dr. Novello mentioned, when 95% of kids are using social media, where is the data that it's actually safe? There is no data that demonstrates that it's safe. And that is a glaring omission. But what is also problematic is the data that shows us that adolescents who are using 3.5 hours a day or more of social media face double the risk of anxiety and depression symptoms. And the average use today of social media among adolescents is 4.8 hours. It's well beyond that threshold. And by the way, that's not all screen time, that is just social media time, right? So what I worry about is the stories that I keep hearing from young people themselves. You see, people have sometimes asked, hey, is this the same as the moral panics we had when the telephone was invented? When TV came on the scene? When people said, hey, that's going to ruin society? This is not the same. Because in those moments, you didn't have kids coming forward and saying, TV is ruining my life. TV is eviscerating my self-esteem and making me feel like I'm worthless. TV is allowing me to be bullied by strangers and exploited by people, some of whom I know, some of whom I don't. And it's allowing that to happen 24/7. But that is literally what young people would tell me about social media. And so what we need to do to address that is to establish safety standards the same way we did for cars. Before we had seatbelts required in cars and airbags, there was an argument that some people were making, hey, just let the companies do it. They know how to make these things. They'll get it right. Just don't get in the way. Don't burden them. Let them do the right thing. That didn't work out, okay? We had to actually put safety standards in place that ultimately got us seatbelts, airbags, crash testing, and other measures that fundamentally help to reduce the number of motor vehicle accidents. And right now we're living in an environment where there is no accountability for social media companies, and where I'm sorry to say that there has been a bipartisan failure by our elected leaders to put in place the safeguards that our kids need. And I have said this directly to these members. The most important responsibility we have as a society is to protect our children. If we cannot do that, then we need to look in the mirror and ask ourselves what we're actually doing. Where are we going to work? How are we evaluating success? What metrics are we actually using? Are those metrics the right ones? And so when I see elected leaders put aside this issue and say, let's work on other things that are easier, when I hear elected leaders tell me privately, the influence of the lobby is just too strong. We just got to work on other issues. That to me is a failure of moral leadership, if you will, and that's what we need more of. We need moral leadership. Now, moral leadership doesn't necessarily always have to come from elected leaders. In fact, I think most often it comes from people in our communities, from parents, from teachers, from faith leaders, from educators, who have the courage to stand up and say, we need to go a different way. I'm going to stand up for those who are being harmed. I'm going to advocate for the solutions that we need. And that is the kind of moral leadership that we need now. I lastly just want to touch on AI for a moment. Artificial intelligence, it's hard to read an article today in the paper without some reference to AI. And I understand why, right? We can already see how it's fundamentally transforming our lives. And the issue of how AI is going to impact mental health has a lot of parallels to what we were just talking about with social media. right? For all the benefits that can come, the question is, how do we mitigate the harms? How do we even understand what the harms are? And I worry that we are on the track to make the same mistakes with AI that we made with social media. You know, we have leaders of major technology companies that are saying today that they now have the solution to loneliness because everyone can just have an AI companion and life will be good. And 10 years ago, that would have seemed dystopian if I had said that to you. You'd be like, what kind of crazy world is that? We don't want to live in that. But this is literally now a business model, right? It is a business strategy that companies are proposing. And this is not to say, again, that technology can help us with mental health. I think there are ways in which technology can be used to help us more deeply understand perhaps what we are going through or what we're dealing with, or can help connect us to resources or to help when it detects that we may have a need. But the problem comes when we instead of trying to supplement human care, we try to substitute for human care. When we try to say AI can replace human beings. I was at a medical conference not too long ago, and a young physician who had just finished training pulled me aside and whispered into my ear. She said, "Can you tell me the truth? Are we going to be obsolete? Did I waste all of this time training? Am I not going to be necessary anymore?" And this is what I always say to people like her, which is that AI can do a lot, but there is power to human presence. There is empathy we can convey as human beings, compassion that we can extend to one another, that is so much more than about the words we use. Because sophisticated AI companions and chatbots, they'll eventually get the words right, but they won't have the life experience, right? They won't be able to sit next to someone who just lost a loved one and say, you know what, I also lost a loved one. I know what this feels like. And they also just won't be able to sit next to them and hold their hand. Because this is something that we all learned in medical school, that sometimes you will know how to cure somebody. Sometimes you'll know how to diagnose them and not to cure them. And sometimes you won't know either. You won't know what the patient has, despite all the best the science has to offer. But it doesn't mean in that moment that there's nothing you can do. Because you can still sit with somebody through their pain. You can remind them that they are not alone. And that is a power of human presence. Now, we all, in this effort to address loneliness and try to figure out how we make technology into something that helps us and not hurts us, we can all do something powerful here. We can all reach out to somebody each day to let them know that we're thinking about them. We can all spend 5 minutes helping somebody, whether we know them or not. That's helping somebody who looks lost in the street, or stopping by to see a coworker or a classmate who is maybe quiet in class or during a meeting, and you suspect maybe something's wrong. And we can also make sure that when we are with others, that we are present. So just out of curiosity, how many people here have been with somebody in conversation when they've been like checking their phone on the side? Yeah? Okay. And raise your hand if that felt good. Nobody, right? So this happens to all of us. And what is being stolen away is not just our time by our devices, but it's our attention. And we sometimes fool ourselves into thinking, oh, you know, I spent an hour talking to Jerome on the phone. We caught up. Did we really? Were we really paying attention to each other? Was I on ESPN checking the scores and refreshing my inbox? Because I may be able to repeat what my friend says back to me, but I may have missed a lot of the nuance. And more importantly, they know that I wasn't fully there. And I say this because, yes, there's a lot of what we've talked about already, policy solutions that need to be put in place, safeguards around technology, social media, and AI. Yes, we need to expand access to care, and we need to use the power of technology to do that. Yes, we need to address stigma, which is still a challenge in our country and certainly across the world. But what we also have to fundamentally look at is how we are leading our lives, the values that are driving us. And the reason I wrote that parting prescription that Dr. Carmona referenced in January of this year was because when I was trying to understand the answer to that deeper question of why are so many people I meet across our country feeling this sense of emptiness, like something is missing in their lives. What I came to realize is what young people specifically kept telling me again and again and again when I asked them how they define success. And what they told me is that society is defining success for them as based on three things: money, power, and fame. That's the triad of modern day success. And if you can get all three of those, then wow, people are going to make documentaries about you, write books about you, you're going to be in the news, you will have made it. Yet many of us know people who have walked that path, checked all three boxes, and are profoundly unhappy, because it turns out there's a different triad that we need if we want deep fulfillment, which is something we all want in our lives and we want for our kids and our grandkids. And that triad is relationships, purpose, and service, right? And those three, when anchored in the core virtue of love, are what create a community. Because a community is where we know each other, where we help each other, and where we find purpose in lifting each other up. I'll just close by saying that it is there in rebuilding that triad of fulfillment in society. That is something that we do together. That's not a law that gets passed. It's not done by a single program that gets created. It's each of us in our day-to-day lives asking ourselves, how can I invest in relationships, in helping others, in service? How can I talk to my kids, to my friends about purpose and ask myself, what's really driving me in my life, and how can I find a sense of purpose that involves lifting other people up? And by the way, that doesn't mean that you have to be a doctor in public health. Right? I remember that famous story many of you have heard of JFK when he visited NASA after he made his moonshot speech in Texas, where he called for America to put a man on the moon. And he went to this custodian who was sweeping the floors, and he said, Sir, tell me, what is it that you do here? And the custodian turned and looked at him and he said, Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon. Okay? That's purpose, right? It doesn't matter if I'm cleaning. You could look at me cleaning the floor in the school and say, you're cleaning the floor in the school. But you can also say, I'm helping create a safe and clean place for the next generation to learn, right? And it's up to all of us in the roles that we play as leaders, as colleagues, to help ourselves and each other find that greater purpose. And this shift, this is a cultural shift that we have to make. I think of it as a culture of clarification, if you will. Because the thing about the triad of fulfillment is this is not new. These values are old. We find them in our history, in our scriptures. And if we look closely, we find them even in our own life experience, if we look for the moments where we have felt most deeply fulfilled. Because the triad of success gives us spikes of joy, but they wear out quickly, right? So I've been so struck by how NBA players and NFL players, how they talk about winning a championship or a Super Bowl. And so many of them say, it was incredible, but then the next day, I was like, I felt this sense of emptiness, like what's next? It's not that those things aren't worth pursuing. There's nothing wrong with being famous, nothing wrong with making money, there's nothing wrong with occupying positions of power. The problem comes when we believe, and when we tell young people in particular, that that is the formula for fulfillment, because it's not. And I do think that young people increasingly are choosing a different way to live that's grounded more in community. That is ultimately what's going to help transform society and help us address not just our mental health and well-being, but our overall sense of fulfillment.
So it's remarkable. There's some clear themes that are emerging from what we're discussing today. I mean, we're hearing about disconnectedness or connectedness, and then we're hearing about different variants of social media and what social media can do in terms of that, right? So we have this interesting dichotomy of social media and connectedness. And so I'm going to push it back into the group here to sort of get some opinion about that. First of all, are they just basically incompatible? Are they mutually exclusive, this idea of working with social media, working with electronics, AI, is that devoid? Does it negate connectedness? Or how do you negotiate that? How do you manage that, right? Some would argue you're managing it, right? It's out there. So this is thrown out to anybody who wants to jump at that, you know. How do you manage that combination? How do you do that balance? How does that manage? Is it outlawing the use of social media at a certain time, as some countries do? Is it some type of better enhancement to produce wellness in young kids? You know, it's really interesting. Pretty much every study that shows resilience and wellness interventions in young kids, particularly those who have any symptoms, is remarkably effective at changing not only their well-being, but the trajectory of illness. You can actually change trajectory of illness by doing that. Do we do that? I mean, what are just some ideas that you have as you've talked this through?
I think first and foremost is that as we had the new digital age thrust upon us and COVID accelerating over the last 4 years that we had COVID, 5 years, I don't think anybody fully appreciated what the ultimate consequences of the digital age would be upon us. And so now we're trying to fix it because we didn't recognize it to begin with, because there was so much enthusiasm of how we can aggregate data, how we can do predictive analytics, how we can get better solutions to problems by, in effect, crowdsourcing information as opposed to being in a room and sharing. We can share with the world right away and get information. But there is a deleterious side of that as well, as we've heard, as my colleagues have pointed out. And so I think that AI and the aggregated data and predictive analytics hold great hope. When we look at the mental health challenges, for instance, if we had a national strategy as it relates to mental health, and we were accumulating that data and appropriately using the aggregated data to make better decisions as we move forward, that would work. But in the meantime, if you can't get the kids off the phone 24 hours a day, you know, so there's a good side of the technology and there's a bad. And now we're learning the risks of that, which we did not anticipate. And I think we're playing catch up now. So I think we don't want to throw it out, because there is great promise in a lot of things, whether it is in the pharmacology that you deal with, neuropharmacology, or in just better understanding of disease and the pathophysiology of disease. But on the other hand, isn't it ironic that we are, if not increasing, causing disease with these very tools? So we have to learn to use them better, is what I would suggest.
So we're here at Dartmouth, a great research institution, and you know, when you ask that question, I would pose a challenge to those in the audience and to say that we need you to do the research so that we better understand the pros and cons of what's out there. Once upon a time, doctors recommended smoking as a treatment for a number of ailments, particularly psychological ailments. And it was people like you all doing the research that then allowed us as Surgeons General to come along and say, well, a Dartmouth study says, a Harvard study says. And so I would say that we are, as we enter this era, and the challenge, and I look at the president over there. I was talking with Francis Collins, the former NIH director, about this a while ago. The types of research that we value often aren't giving us answers to these questions, particularly around mental health and newer issues that we need to be able to move forward. And so the leaders within our academic institutions need to make sure we're prioritizing, that we're valuing faculty advancement when people are researching these types of issues. That's one thing you can do. Another very specific thing I think we can do, and I was at the American Society for Bioethics and Health in Portland, Oregon last week. And it's another conversation I've had at NIH. We're very excited to sit down and talk about all the innovations that we're pushing forward, but we wait until problems occur before we ask, should we have done that? Yeah. And so we need to invite the ethicists. We need to invite the young people. We need to invite the end users to the table earlier as we're developing products, so that we don't develop a social media platform only with the people in the room whose goal is to make as much money from it as possible. And then at the back end say, oh my gosh, what have we done? And so I think those are things that we can and should be doing as we contemplate design, innovation, and research moving forward.
And as we're coming close to in that spirit, I'm, again, amazingly impressed on how not one of you had it easy to make change. You know, you guys change things and change the world for the better. But that doesn't come easily. Our field, we're talking pediatric mental health right now, is under duress in terms of messaging and what's truth, what's not, et cetera. What advice do you have in terms of how did you do it and what should we do? I know it's a little derivative of this, but there's a lot of messengers of pediatric mental health out there. What do we do moving forward in a preemptive way?
Well, it has been suggested that 60% of parents use the social media equal to the children. And children imitate behavior of parents. But 40% of those children that have the parents use social media at 60% have depression because they have lost the face-to-face interaction. So if that is the case, and I'm going to follow up what my parents do, maybe the parents have to be more alert that their behavior really guides the behavior of the children. So when we were supposed to, 3 months ago, eliminate TikTok, and all of a sudden it disappeared. So somewhere along the way, like you say, power and money guides sometimes what we need to do for the children more than the power of the country. But I always feel when the questions are that intense and all the responses are so varied, I like to rather address it in Spanish so I want to understand myself. So a mí verdaderamente no quiero decirles a ustedes una cosa de este tremendo. So when I talk Spanish, it's just pass it to Dr. Alex. But I truly believe the behavior of the parents conduces the children to do exactly the same. And that interaction that you used to have in our age group is lacking. And at this moment, I think it's time to recoup our youth before we really have lost them all. And that's why the world is watching for the ones who still have no problem with social media, avoid the complications that is causing the advanced countries. And in so, then this conference has been extremely useful in setting the tone for what the future of the countries that are more or less in the development phase, trying to avoid the problems of the ones who already got there.
You know, Tim,
Go ahead.
I think the issue that you raise is an important one, in that a world that is filled with the plague of mis and disinformation, and people don't know who to turn to because there is an epidemic of trust that is before us. Who is the arbiter of truth in the world today when even our elected officials project mis and disinformation for their own political benefit, for instance? And so it's one of the things I think that the value that we all have is that independent of what parties nominated us to become Surgeon General, we all feel, intensely about the fact that our job is to act selflessly and to be able to review whatever the science that's available, to be able to tell those inconvenient truths to the public as to what needs to be done. And I think that, as I see the challenge today, who is the arbiter of truth in an environment where there's so much mistrust? And whether it's our children or whether it's adults and things that we have to do. And I think it starts with educating our children. How do you know what's fake news? How do you know what's not manipulated that's out there driving something? Because after all, the media is often looking for clicks and page turns. And so it's up to us who, I know how do we feel as Surgeon Generals, but it's up to all of you, as Jerome has said, to start thinking about how do we educate our students? How do we teach people to decipher what is just garbage that's out there for some intent that has nothing to do with reality, so that we finally can get back to the truth driving everything and all of our decisions and our policy. I think that's the important issue.
You can actually go to surgeongeneral.gov. Yeah. As I mentioned, and Dr. Murthy, and I hope you'll go a little bit deeper on this, actually wrote an advisory and give some of these practical tips based on the evidence as we know it to help people better understand how to discern misinformation from actual truth.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I do think this is one of the great challenges, misinformation, that we face. But two things I would just say, and that advisory that Dr. Adams mentioned has a lot of strategies we can use as individuals, as organizations. But one thing that is very clear is that it's very difficult in an environment where people are disconnected and hence distrust each other, it's very difficult to actually make sure good information gets through to people. Because when people are disconnected from each other, it's easy to weaponize them against each other, right? To turn them against one another and using often false stories or allegations or this or that. It's one of the reasons if you're a foreign adversary, for example, and you're trying to think, how do you weaken America? One of the ways you would do it is you would try to put disinformation and misinformation into populations that are feeling marginalized, isolated, and alienated, right? And sadly, we've actually seen some of that happen. But the other thing I think we have to do a better job of in medicine and in public health is make sure that when it comes to health information, that we're not just relying on the quality of the information for it to be taken up and understood, but that we're actually going and building relationships in communities. Because even though people's faith in large institutions may have declined over time, as human beings, we all need to trust something and someone. So in COVID, for example, we saw that even though, again, faith in traditional institutions was flagging, people still trusted their doctor. They still often went to their friends and family members for advice on what they should do, right? So when we build a relationship with someone, if you're a local department of health or a local university or a medical school, and you're working to build relationships in communities so people know that that message comes with a face that they recognize, because that person came and did a town hall with them, or showed up at their church to speak the other day, or came to the school to a parent-teacher meeting to talk about a health issue. All of that helps tremendously. I'll also say two other things. On the social media piece as well, I don't think we can or should throw all of tech out the window and say, let's go back to horses and buggies and the way things were. We just don't have that option. But there are certain steps we can take until the technology is safer, particularly for our kids, right? Like one is, given that adolescence is a unique phase of development, it's not the same to just introduce social media to a 13-year-old versus to a 30-year-old, right? And for that reason, young people are particularly susceptible to social comparison, social suggestion. Impulse control isn't fully developed yet. And so my belief is that delaying the use of social media until past that early adolescence, until at least 16 and potentially later, depending on a child's maturity, what the data says, and the safety of the platforms, I think that is eminently reasonable and advisable. The second thing I would say, though, is for not just our kids, but for us as adults, creating tech-free zones in our life is also essential. Not just social media free, tech-free. And we need to do that to protect areas that are critical for our growth and development: sleep, in-person interaction, learning, and physical activity, right? Those are 4 areas that get short shrift when we're spending more and more and more of our time on technology. And so, for example, saying that, okay, before we go to bed at night, we're all gonna plug in our phones in the kitchen, and then we'll get them back in the morning. That protects both quantity and quality of sleep. Saying that meal times are times where we're just gonna focus on each other, everyone's putting their devices away, that is positive. And you know what? A lot of young people are starting to do this on their own. When they get together with their friends, they're saying, okay, we're all going to turn our devices off or put them in a bowl, and whoever reaches for their phone first, maybe they'll pay for the meal or do something else. But this is a movement that's increasingly being led by high school and college students, which is encouraging to see. But we all need those tech-free zones. And the last thing I see on social media is taking these steps with other people is essential. Because just out of curiosity, how many people here have tried to start a diet or exercise routine and fallen off the wagon? I have, so I'm raising my hand. All right. So one thing we all probably know is that behavior change is hard. It's always hard, but it's harder when you're trying to do it alone. Versus when you have a buddy and you say, hey, can we just decide together that we're gonna make this change in our life? It's much easier to do. I realized after I finished my term in office, I didn't tell you guys this, but I realized I had put on some more pounds than I wanted to, right? And I needed to lose that weight. But I also knew that it wasn't so easy, to lose the weight. So I made a pact with 2 buddies. And I said, okay, and they also had put on some weight. And so the 3 of us said every Friday we're gonna check in on how we're doing. And together we helped each other lose the weight. Same with social media. I was having trouble with my own social media use years ago, right? I was spending too much time on it. I was busy as could be. Yet somehow, I'm finding time to scroll through my feed and read comments from j342@yahoo.com. God knows who that is. And then feeling worried about what that person is saying. You know, like, these are all the things that we do. And I was like, I need to change my pattern here. And I was having this actually hand surgery a few years ago, and a couple of buddies called me up. They're like, okay, look, you're going to have a couple of days where you're going to have trouble typing while you're recovering. So let's use that as an opportunity to change something in your life. What do you want to change? I was like, here, I've been struggling with social media. So we made a pact. Then they checked on me, like every few days. How's it going? What are you doing? If you feel like falling off the wagon, text us. If this sounds like AA, it kind of was, you know, because the truth is that social media addiction is real, right? So, you know, I think finally, just in closing here, I would just say that it's hard to look at the world right now and to not feel some sense of despair. Because over the last few years, we look around and many people tell me, they say, you know, it feels like people are just meaner to each other. It feels like we don't care as much about each other as maybe we used to. And what I would just say is that both traditional and social media have created a distortion in our visual field. It's made it feel like the world is a lot meaner and hopeless and insensitive than it actually is. But if you actually put that aside and look at what's happening in real life, then you see what I and so many of us saw when we served and traveled the country. You see neighbors stepping up to help other neighbors when someone loses a job or falls ill. You see parents rushing toward a kid who falls off the monkey bars in the playground at school, even if it's not their kid, because they know that every child matters. You see people reaching into their pocket and contributing whenever there's a hurricane or a tornado that tears a town apart. Because the truth is, that is who we are. We are kind, we are generous, we are loving people. That's how we came into this world, and it may have gotten buried under layers of cynicism and disappointment and worry. But those qualities, which are inherent to who we are as human beings, they are still there, waiting to be awakened. And when we reach into that and reach for one of those qualities, we inspire other people around us as well. And when I forget this, I just remember my kids, who, like all kids, came into the world like this. And my son and daughter reminded me of this recently when they came up to the dining table for dinner and tossed a tennis ball at me. And they did that not because they're trying to hit me or hurt me, but because we do this to test each other's reflexes all the time. And we can assess later whether that's questionable parenting on my part. But my daughter threw it at me, and I reached for it instinctively, forgetting that I had a frozen shoulder at that time. And if you've ever had a frozen shoulder, you know the last thing you're supposed to do is sudden movements. And I instinctively felt this lancing pain go through my shoulder. I got down on my knees. I was like, closing my eyes, like gripping my shoulder, waiting for the pain to subside. And that's when I felt this small hand rest on my shoulder, and this small head lean against my head. And I opened my eyes, and it was my son. The truth is, he never went to sensitivity training. Nobody taught him what to do when somebody's in pain. But he did what so many of us came into this world knowing we had to do. And so those instincts are still there in all of us. And if we call upon them, if we encourage them in each other, if we role model them, for our kids in particular, then I believe we have what it takes to ultimately create a world that is more grounded in relationships, in purpose, in service, that's rooted in that core virtue of love, and a world where we can all lift up each other and create a world where we can all thrive.
Wow. We are the lucky ones. And I just want to express on behalf of everyone at Dartmouth, at Geisel, at Dartmouth Health, our profound gratitude and our humility for the honor of being able to be in the presence of such incredible nonpartisan public servants who've used not just science, but also humanity to help advance the health of all. Thank you. And you'll be glad to know that we saw nary a cell phone in use in the audience during your remarks. People were truly connected. So it takes obviously a great number of people to put on an event like this. And I first want to thank President Bylock for her leadership in this space. And on the last page of the program, there's a list of just some of the people who've contributed to this. I want to just call out a few. Thank you, Dr. Willen, for moderating the event. Thank you, Professor Blanchflower, for helping to organize. Steve Bernstein, the director of the Coop Institute, and Esteban Garcia, our Dartmouth Chief Health and Wellness Officer. And of course, the incomparable Dr. Lisa McBride. And I'd like Dr. McBride So Dr. McBride is now going to award the Surgeons General with the C. Everett Koop Medal on behalf of Geisel, Dartmouth Health, and Dartmouth College, commemorating this moment. So thank you all for joining this special event. I want to invite you all to now join the Surgeons General at the top of the hop for an informal meet and greet that'll begin at 11 a.m. So we'll see you at the reception at the top of the hop. Thanks again to all.